Hey everyone, welcome back to Field Stories. My name is Chris Catola, and well, yes, you can see it is just me. It's another one of those episodes where my co-hosts have abandoned me. Well, it depends. With reason, good reason in the case of Michela. I always give her slack. Not so much good reason in the case of Nick. No, I joke. He's actually spending one of the few days in his schedule back in his home country before as he transitions from Suriname back to his next exciting adventure in Uganda, which he leaves for within, I think, the next 48 hours. So he's a little bit busy. And plus, I'm recording this right now in the middle of the night for him. And he usually only stays up this late if alcohol and women are involved. So, I understand that he wouldn't be able to join us today. Michela is back in Massachusetts today, back to the grind, back to the turtle life. So, it is just me right now. I am sitting here in back home in the Amazon in beautiful Rio Tampapata and Madre Diaz. Just got back from a really awesome week in Cusco, actually, attending COLAM, which is a Latin American and Caribbean Bat Congress. And it was an amazing week sharing information and learning from bat researchers across all of Latin America. And super, super inspiring, amazing week. So I'm back here for the final week of our field stint here in Tampapata before I have a bit of a break from the field research and go into other types of work and other activity. That's why I'm here. That's why they're not here. And this week's guest is actually someone I'm really excited to speak to, Phil Chaon. And he is someone that I've followed and sort of spoken to off and on in social media and seen all the amazing travel he's done in birding and bird tours. And also he's a co-author of a book called Habitats of the World, which I think is an amazing idea and an amazing book. It's been out about 2 years now. And it's basically, as the name implies, every habitat type in the world basically is in this book. And as someone who has this book, I can recommend it wholeheartedly. If you like traveling, if you like understanding the world, if you like birding or herping and you want to understand where you're going before you go there, it is an amazing book. And they do such a great job of describing in summary, in brief details, so you can quickly consume it, what is actually happening, and what the habitat's like in these different parts of the world. They also do a really interesting comparison where they draw similarities to different habitat types and how, if you're familiar with one and you're going somewhere else, you can kind of understand, wow, okay, I can kind of expect it to be similar. Obviously, the animals are different, but the structure is similar. So, really interesting book. Highly recommend it. And I'm really looking forward to speaking to him today and picking his brain about his career, his background, and the book, and sort of what led them to making this book. So without further ado, let's get to it. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And my guest today, I'm excited to speak to really kind of digitally in person for the first time, is Phil Chaon. And I definitely was going to butcher this name. I'm glad I asked you how to pronounce it before I said it. I don't have a history of butchering names, so I think I got it relatively right. So it's great to have you join us, Phil. I'll let you introduce your background. I think there's a lot to it. I know you basically through social media, as so many of us know each other now through that. And I've seen you doing a lot of work with birds, a lot of tours of birds. And also, you're one of the co-authors of a book that was released, I think, last year or 2 years ago. I guess 2 years ago it came out, I think, which is Habitats of the World, which is, I think, an amazing book. I have a physical copy for sure. I have a digital one too, but I have a physical copy, and it's just such an amazing book. I love the idea of it. So we'll probably talk a bit about that as well. But so sort of know your work from afar. But excited to get to know you more personally, and then of course hear your story. So if you want to give a little more background about yourself, Phil, that would be awesome. I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really happy to be here. I've been interested in wildlife and nature since birth, pretty much. My first word was duck, so been hooked by birds for a long time, and just originally went to Humboldt State in Northern California and got like a wildlife degree and a botany degree, and then just kind of went out into the field and never wanted to leave, and did field work for about 10 years, within like kind of the northern Rockies in the US and California, and a couple long seasons in Peru, Australia, Papua New Guinea,
Wow.
Borneo. yeah, just like a whole mix of projects, and then from there kind of fell into ecotourism. I had a field season cancel and ended up leading bird watching tours on St. Paul Island out in the Bering Sea, and got hooked up with some bird tour companies and started doing more of the tourism side of things. I still do some field work for like Playa Lakes joint venture and some bird survey stuff, but yeah, had a lot of fun working on the Habitats of the World field guide, and just finished Habitats of North
I
America
saw that.
follow up. So kind of
Yeah,
like an expanded, yeah. And that'll be out in early
nice.
February next year. And so like that was, yeah, so it's kind of
Yeah.
finally out of my hands, and like nice to be,
Super cool. Cool. Nice. Well,
yeah.
that's awesome. It sounds like, yeah, it's quite the diverse background. I love that. I mean, lots of questions that come to mind. I think first thing I'm going to just get sort of work off of the theme of the book, because again, I really love the concept of the original, and I think having even more, I guess this new book will be a more detailed, even more local focused version of that, right? And that sounds amazing. And I don't know if you guys have plans to do this about other regions of the world, but that would be really cool. Um, I wonder, I guess for starters, like what was the genesis of that book and the idea of it and how it came together with you and your co-authors, and I guess what was the genesis of that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the real person behind this idea is Ian Campbell, who's one of the owners of Tropical Birding, and lifelong naturalist living in Australia and Ecuador. And in Australia, bird bird communities and bird habitats are really closely tied, and like the habitat changes aren't obvious. And just having that experience of leading tours and being like, oh, this looks like a spot that I should look for
Yeah.
striated grass wren. Like, you get people in the van will be like, how do you know? And you're like, well, you can see it. It's like open mallee. There's good spinifex
Mhm.
grass, like all these things. And you realize that there's not really that kind of intermediate definition sort of approach to habitats, where it's either like you get biomes of the world, which breaks it down to 6 habitats,
Amazon,
or you
boreal.
get these
Yeah.
incredibly, yeah, exactly. And like it's
Yeah.
got trees or it's rocks or whatever. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like not much better
Uh-huh.
than the four elements or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you get these intense botanical definitions where you have 2,500 habitats
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
Massachusetts, and it's like any assemblage of three bushes is its own habitat. It's like,
That's
okay,
true.
it's a buttonbush dogwood swamp, or it's buttonbush red maple swamp, or,
Yeah.
and like those are interesting, but they're not super useful to people that are looking for birds, or looking for kind of other
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
more
yeah, from
more
a
visible
functional
vertebrates.
ecological point of
Yeah.
view, unless you're studying that group specifically, they don't actually vary what lives there that much, right? So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, yeah, that's really cool. I mean, again, I think it's interesting that it's someone who would work in a tropical area who would kind of come with the idea first, and also someone who likes birds because again, I think if you go birding, they're omnipresent, they're always there, so you can see these changes more quickly. And yeah, if you work in a tropical area, well, again, you've obviously worked in many tropical areas, including where I am now in Peru, and yeah, you know that you literally climb 20 meters up a little hill, and you're like, okay, now I'm going to get the black-faced emperor, and I'm going to get whatever other terra firma bird. But oh no, I'm going down the hill. Now I'm going to get blue-throated antshrike. Now I'm going to get plain-throated ant wren. And you know that because it's a 20-meter difference, but suddenly all the composition of the species change. And then the ones that live in both. People such as us see that difference, but I think it's so cool to have that summarized because yeah, myself, when I go to these new places and just reference the book and have an idea. When we did Uganda for the first time last year, I referenced the book and I had a pretty good idea what I was looking at when we got there and what to expect. So it's a really good idea. Amazing. I not to pitch ideas to you, but I'm curious just to get your feedback on this concept and also just your thoughts on the idea in general. Um, One thing that's always been interesting to me is not just where we are today with habitat, like what we see when we go somewhere, we drive, we fly, we walk, but also the historical. And I don't mean necessarily like millions of years historical, but I mean the recent historical composition of the habitat. Because as you know as well as I do, the species that have evolved today that are now liking forest edge around a lodge or liking farmland clearly didn't evolve for that specifically, or at least to the quantity it exists today. Because prior to human expansion,
Yeah.
Europe was completely different. The Andes were different, and that's just two examples of hundreds across the world. And I wonder if it had ever been discussed in your team, or if you'd ever thought of it, of trying to do almost a version of that book that really looks at the recent history from an evolutionary point of view of habitats across the world. I wonder if that had ever come up to you guys.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a really important consideration. Maybe not as much for active field naturalists, but for people in conservation and especially people doing active land management. This book does touch some on historical land use changes. There's a conservation section in the Habitats of North America that goes over some of the history of how at least the usage of the habitat has changed. There's a little bit, not as much as I'd like, because it's something that could
Or,
fill volumes and
yeah.
volumes related to like indigenous habitat management and historical pre-colonial North America. Um, but yeah, I mean, the idea of what is supposed to be
Yeah.
where and what we're trying to restore. I mean, I remember I grew up in Ohio, and um, in 1800, there were a lot of these grassland birds,
Yeah.
things like barn owls and Henslow's sparrow and upland sandpiper were in maybe 10% of the
Yeah.
counties in the state. And then around 1900, the state was 90% deforested, and they were in 90% of the counties. And now they're back down to being in a really small percentage. And
Yeah.
there's all this push for grassland restoration and to bring these birds back. And you're like, well, it was really a 80-year blip where they were present here. And I mean, I know you can see it in the Amazon with the
Hmm.
expansion of some of those species that really like the scrub, things like Brazilian
Oh,
teal
absolutely.
showing
I
up.
mean, like
And
I mean, in
yeah,
Tambopata, I mean, this is very niche. You and me will get it. Maybe not a lot of listeners, but we're seeing, good old crested caracara on the river all the time. That's ridiculous. Southern lapwing every day. That's ridiculous. It shouldn't be here. And that is a reflection of the fact that they're just colonizing what is becoming grasslands around the rainforest. It's terrible. So, yeah, no, for sure. Um, I think an area like this is visceral for a lot of the people who visit. But I think even areas like I often talk about the Andes and like because I go there sometimes and like polylepis forests just disappearing, and that even goes back to Inca times, really. And but of course, species that we're now trying to conserve, these are species that would have relied on the forest, and now their numbers are declining because that forest isn't there. And it's being replaced with pines and eucalyptus and ridiculous trees which should never be there. So it's just really interesting. So no, it's an interesting topic, and maybe if you guys ever decide to do a third sort of series in it, maybe historical habitats of the world could be an idea.
yeah, yeah. No, we got some regional ones coming out. So like I think Habitats of Africa is also coming out
Well,
at the beginning of next
I'll
year.
be in line for that. That's
And
awesome. Wow, that's
yeah,
great. Pretty
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, for sure.
Yeah. Just switching to you'd mentioned you've done field work in different parts of the world. And I have to ask, I'm curious, especially places like Papua New Guinea and of that. What were those experiences like? Because I assume not to put an age date on you, but it wasn't like last year you were doing it. It was a while ago that you were doing it, I'm assuming. And we've heard a lot of stories about not being safe or being hard to access. And I guess what was your experience about working in some of those really remote Asian islands, Australasian regions?
Yeah, I mean, I think every single one was a unique experience and kind of different in terms of whether you were at a research station or you were just kind of in a little field camp and it was just you and people working on the project. Or in Papua New Guinea, we always stayed with families. And I mean, Papua New Guinea is a really interesting and
Hmm.
pretty difficult place to work. It's just kind of the pinnacle of these projects don't work without involving the local community and keeping the people that own the land and are there full time as part of it. And so it was a lot of building trust and making connections and trying to keep everybody happy and involved and not having people feel like they're excluded from it, but also training training people locally to help to run the project essentially. After we were gone for a couple of seasons, that sort of stuff. But I mean, just within the island, right? It's such a culturally diverse place. You've got like 800 languages, and you go 20 miles down the road, and it's the attitude and practices are really, yeah, I mean, really just very rapidly and across this incredible spectrum. I think the one thing that's consistent is that all land is
Okay.
privately held. It's all, I mean, it's all communal to some level, but it's just like each family has land holdings, and there's not really, no matter how undisturbed or untouched it looks, like you're on somebody's property in some way. And so that's kind of one of those things where, um, yeah, making and maintaining the connections and really being aware of where you're going and what you're doing.
Wow.
Is, yeah, but it is a really incredible place. You got to access and stay in some places that were, really, like there was one spot that we stayed on the Middle Fly River that a couple of years ago you'd been able to fly in, and there was a little grass airstrip out there that you could land on, and then the mower broke, and so you had to go in by boat now, and it was just like a 19-hour boat ride
Because they can't cut the
downriver.
grass well enough. Oh my,
Right. Yeah,
that's
exactly.
such a
It's just
tropical story. I love it. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I guess the next sort of question that sort of comes into my mind then is, as someone who, like you said, you've done a lot of research in different parts of the world. I know you didn't mention you've definitely done some research here near us in Peru in the past. That we talked about a place in Hermano we both sort of share have been to before, Pantiacoya. So you've been there, so that's cool. And so yeah, a lot of experience with research, and now transitioning into the world of sort of ecotourism and all that. I guess the first question would be like, what has that been like for you as a person who loves nature? I'm sure there's pros and cons to both. I mean, and I can probably speak to some of the cons of and the pros of fieldwork. But I mean, have you kind of transitioning, having a real good experience in both? How does that work for you with those pros and cons?
yeah, I think they're really complementary in a
Hmm.
nice way. They kind of at least encompass sort of like both ends of the experiencing nature spectrum. They kind of miss the middle part sometimes, which I feel like is doing the sort of trips that you're on, maybe with like colleagues or friends or that. But they both. Right, a lot of the time with field work, you're in these little bubbles that are great, where you're just surrounded by people that all know about your study system, and they're all interested in science, they're all interested in nature, and you kind of have like these weird you're in a tent with a bunch of people in the woods for 6 months, and like all of a sudden like language starts to diverge, and you have like weird ritual
Yeah,
practices, and like it's a really microcosm of this is what happens when you get a bunch of nerds that are all into the same stuff, and you leave them on
true.
an island for months. And the ecotourism side is you don't get these like really intimate connections to locations where the trails, and what birds' activity patterns are, or like where a mixed flock is going to be at a certain time of day. But you do get to have this really great kind of rapid sampling of an area, like whether it's an endemic bird region or a habitat or a whole country if it's small enough, and you get to do all these little targeted stops and see a huge variety of things and share them with people that are new to it and are excited, and you get that kind of vicarious joy of like, okay, this is the thousandth time that I've seen a capped heron, but this is this person's first time, and they're stoked, and I'm stoked to be able to show it to them, and that kind of like joy of like, you know, you, yeah, sharing something new with people and seeing it through their eyes, and yeah, the best tours I've had are ones where maybe we don't see everything, but where
Yeah,
people are
when
really
they feel. and they
jazzed on what
feel
they
that
do
passion
see.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I mean, even the work I do, because I do field work more, but I bring a lot of volunteers in regularly, new people that are younger. So I understand what you mean. And then when you have those connections, even if it is for days or weeks with people, and they really see how excited they are, it's really special. It's true. I was curious. One last topic about ecotourism. Then, what I mean, personally, I think most people who studied it or work with it understand the sort of the benefits of ecotourism in many ways to supporting conservation, bringing money in from Western countries to our developing countries, and supporting and giving a value financially, intrinsically to property and conservation. But I guess what are your perspectives as someone who's done both and traveled to so many parts of the world? Because as I'm sure you know, as I know, conservation and the issues facing it are never black and white. They're never simple. They're always very gray. They're very, very complicated regionally, locally, and there's so many factors influencing them that, what are your thoughts about the role and I guess almost the responsibility of people who are leading and organizing ecotourism operations in countries such as in Papua New Guinea or Borneo or Peru or anywhere like that?
Yeah, I mean, like any sort of business, there's a million different ways to do it, and there are practices that I think are good, and there are practices that are not as helpful. And I feel like each country varies a lot. There's places where I think um, the volume and consistency of ecotourism makes it possible for domestic operations to kind of take over in a lot of these international situations. And I've definitely felt that shift. I mean, there's a lot. It's so easy to find really good and really accessible local guides in a huge number of places. Places with lower volume, it's kind of tough, like it's really hard to set up an ecotourism industry when you're going to have four tour groups come in a 2 month period, and that's kind of it for the year. But there are small supplemental income things that I think help a lot and kind of do demonstrate um, some sort of value besides intrinsic value in preserving nature. I remember I did quite a few
Mm.
tours in Ethiopia, and a lot of the spots, you pull up in. I mean, again, the tours were so infrequent there. How people were spotting you was kind of amazing, but you'd pull over on the side of the road and you'd be one of 6 birding tours going to that spot this year, but all of a sudden like 10 people would show up and they're like, "Oh, you're here to see Prince Rispoli's Turrico? Like, follow me, I know where the fruiting fig is." And like,
Wow.
you know, they do, yeah, and so you do have those kinds of experiences, but I think the more you can kind of hand off these sort of things from this, like 40 years ago, there wasn't really the infrastructure or the availability of information that made it possible. And these international tour operators definitely had a kind of a central role to play in people visiting these places. But I think as much as possible, just trying to hand things off to local ecotourism, domestically run operations, um, is is really the way to go. I mean, at least having, if you're going to have a foreign guide, also having a guide from in the country and working with ground operators and having drivers and just kind of creating a type of tourism that somebody can have a livelihood from, as opposed to just sort of
Yeah.
being a fleeting thing, because maintenance is always such a problem. I mean, I think the number of times you go somewhere and you see an overly ambitious ecotourism project that's kind of fallen, or like half-built eco lodges, or like a beautiful mangrove boardwalk that hasn't been maintained in 30 years, and just like having um, systems in place that allow have the maintenance and perpetuity of that sort of ecotourism are
Yeah.
the main things we should be
No,
working
agreed.
for. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also, my perspective has always been, it's really important for us, as if we lead guides or if we're, because in a way, yourself and anytime I'm working with foreigners too, we're kind of the, we're the first point of connection for people coming to understand the area. And obviously, you're right. Having more people locally to be involved is very important as well. But we're often the first people to talk to them, and especially if language is a barrier, we may be the only people to have long conversations. And I've always felt personally, at least, to have a, I feel like kind of a responsibility to try to be very realistic about the situation in the area, and also to acknowledge what I don't know. And I worry that some tour operators and some guides as well, do want to sometimes give their tourists a very sanitized version of what is happening in the area. And where I work is a good example. We have so much illegal gold mining, obviously, on top of the deforestation and other aspects. And like I joke, I don't do a lot of tours, but I have led some tours, and I always joke with my tourists right away. I'm like, I'm sorry in advance because I'm probably going to be a little depressing some days, but I also feel like it's my responsibility to tell you what's really happening, because we're going to go to great places with great birds and great animals, but we're also going to pass by areas that are not great anymore. And we need to be able to talk about both. So I personally feel as a guide that it's my responsibility to be able to give that nuanced, as much as I can, as a foreigner living here now, give a nuanced perspective on it. So that's always been my personal feeling.
Yeah, I mean, and the conservation challenges, especially at the Amazon, is such an interesting system in terms of us, like, I mean, from an outside view, they kind of gets this monolithic designation as like one big, vast, contiguous, uniform place, and it's so varied and so wild. And I just remember visiting some spots in Ecuador, and like places that are completely untouched from logging and have been for a long time, and people still talking about bird declines there, with stuff like foliage gleaners and large ant shrikes, and that kind of clade of like medium-sized insectivores, and like being like, well, what's happening with them? And they're like, well, we're not seeing as many stick insects. We're seeing like declines in
Oh,
some of these large phasmids and
mm,
katydids,
wow,
and don't necessarily know what it's related
that's
to,
amazing.
but I mean, they're just like, yeah, it's always a real, yeah. There's the kind of the obvious in your face problems that you can address, and then there's other ones that'll still be there
Yeah,
afterwards that are
it's
going to continue to be head
it's always
scratchers.
very
Yeah.
complicated and nuanced, and yeah, I think explaining that to people as much as we can is important. But to move away to final question, then we'll get to your story. I always sort of do this when Nick and Michela aren't here. I kind of steal one of Nick's favorite questions, or at least a bit of it, which is, as someone such as yourself who's traveled to many parts of the world, I don't know what your life list is, but it's probably many thousands of birds. I'm curious if there must be a habitat or a bird, or maybe it's a mammal, maybe it's a reptile, amphibian. What is it that you haven't seen, or a place you haven't been that you still really like, is like exciting for you? Because you mentioned your tourists see things for the first time, but for you, what's that thing? What's that place?
Um. Oof. I think, I mean, there's a couple of Socotra's really high on my list. I really want to see those dragon blitz
Yeah,
forests out there. I think the big one right now for me, is probably West Africa, maybe
yeah,
Equatorial
nice.
Guinea. I feel like I've spent not as much time as I'd like, but a fair amount of time in primary lowland rainforest in both the neotropics and in Asian tropics and in Papua New Guinea, and just kind of getting to see it more in Africa and seeing the parallels, and differences, would be really, really cool. I was in Western Uganda,
Yep.
at Semliki National Park earlier this year, and that was kind of like
Yeah, yeah,
right on the edge of it, right? It's like you're like peering
yeah.
over the fence into the Congo
Yeah,
Basin, and like, but yeah, you do get to start seeing the edge of that where you have like driver ant swarms that have bird
wow.
communities that follow
Yeah.
them, and these cool parallels to neotropics that I don't know, pretty amazing to see in person, and I just want to, yeah, explore that a
Yeah,
little
no,
more
I mean,
deeply.
that's very cool. And obviously, that's also the allure of, I mean, we both know there's species of vertebrates undescribed there that nobody's ever seen, or people have seen maybe but never even described. It feels like that, and some parts of Papua New Guinea are still those frontiers of discovery available. So yeah, I can understand that drive for sure. If we ever do anything in one of those countries, I'll let you know. Hopefully one day, I'd love to. It'd be great.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
now that's pretty cool.
yeah.
Yeah,
Gabon's really
yeah,
high
no,
up there. Yeah,
we're always open. If anything ever crosses your desk, let me know. But yeah, super
yeah,
cool.
for sure.
Wow, that's awesome, man. I really appreciate it. It's been really fun talking to you. I feel like we could just shoot things back and forth for hours, but let's go ahead and get to your story. So yeah, I don't know what it is. We haven't even talked about. I don't even know if you had time to prepare. I kind of threw it at you when we started a half an hour ago. But I suspect that, again, if we sat down and we just had a beer and I said, tell me your best story, you probably could think of something. So here's your chance. Share with me your best story you want to share.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you've been doing field work long enough, you have all of these really incredible encounters with wildlife, and you have all of these really amazing experiences, like figuring out or having it really driven into you, like how certain things work in the natural world, or these kind of connections that you make. Um, but the one thing that you always kind of forget about both before and after, but not during, is the logistical side of things, and like some of that, like I remember I just graduated college. I went to work on this
Mhm.
project in Peru, and um, we're in Cusco, and we're heading down the Manu Road the next day out to this field site,
Okay, yeah.
Paniacoya downriver. And we haven't met anybody in the team. We've had maybe one email exchange, and we're all at the same hotel. And we wake up the next morning early and find out that we're all being sent off to buy field supplies for the whole season. And I just remember hearing like Phil, you go get potatoes and onions. And I'm like, okay. He's like, there's a market. Like, go to the market. And like, how many potatoes and onions? He's like, I don't know, as many as 12 people are going to need
Oh
for the
my
next four
God.
and a half months. You're just trying to do calculations in your head. You're like, how many onions would I eat in a day? And end up going there. And then there's a like a general meeting point later. And yeah, just haggling and like trying to figure out, like, I guess I'm buying 150 pounds of onions right now, and you've got these big burlap sacks, and you're like, how do I get them to this meeting point? So I end up flagging down like 3 or 4 taxis and filling the back of the taxis with bags of onions
Yeah.
and potatoes. And then I end up on this like this gravel parking area on the edge of Cusco, and there's like a big covered truck, like not
Mhm.
fully a semi truck, but like
Yeah.
the whole
Yep.
thing's tarped up and got the double doors on the back. Yeah. All right, everyone starts showing up with various gear. Like, here's 6 months worth of toilet paper, or here's all of our spices or powdered drink mix or whatever. And we all start loading it into the back of this truck. And then there's already stuff loaded in there too. There's like some oil drums and a couple motorbikes and stuff that's
Mhm.
going down to go downriver once it gets to Itwania or Pocopata.
Yeah.
Pocopata. Yeah. And then we got it all loaded up and we're like, all right, we're heading down. Where's our transportation? They're like, that's it.
Yeah, that sounds bang on. I love it.
Uh-huh. And so like all 12 of us crawl into the back of this no way to see outside. You're just in pure darkness, like laying on top of oil drums, or the lucky people got to sleep on top of the toilet paper
Mhm.
supply. And like, it's 14
Yeah.
hours down a windy mountain road, and we get about 4 hours in and we've run out of things to say to each other.
Yep. Yep.
um
Oh man.
so somebody pulled out a big bottle of Benadryl and we all sent ourselves off to sleep. And
I love it.
you know
Oh.
Then all of a sudden we wake up and it's 2 in the morning and there's rain pouring down and the truck stopped, and you're like, what are we doing here? We were at the mid
Yep.
elevation field site, and what we didn't realize was that we had to split up the supplies for the field season and leave half of them up higher and half of them
Where was
would
this?
come
Via
with us.
Carmen?
Higher
Oh,
up was
Ketcha. Okay, okay,
Waikecha.
okay. Yeah, I know exactly where
Yeah.
you're talking now. Okay. Yep.
So it's cold and rainy and it's dark and we're all in this Benadryl haze and we've got headlamps on and we're trying to divide up, like bags of whatever, bags of sugar or bags of flour and um did as well as we thought we could. It seemed pretty good, but yeah, we, like 20 hours later eventually made it out to the field site and did the accounting of things and we're like, "Oh, I guess they got all of the turmeric for the next 4 months." Like, I guess, but we've got all the cumin, so like it's gonna be a very
Yeah.
specific flavor profile on all the rice and beans that we have. And
Oh man,
but yeah, then you realize like how much goes into it and what you can live without pretty quickly.
that's
You're like,
true.
okay, I'm
Yeah.
yeah.
That is amazing. That is, and like obviously for me, I can exactly picture this, and I can tell you that this really hasn't changed. This is basically how it still is. The most random things. You just have a truck full of equipment, and somebody needs to leave to get to the highway, and it's like, well, it's okay. They'll ride on the equipment on the back of this truck in a bumpy road. Whatever, we will make it work somehow. That is literally Peru. That is just the tropics in a nutshell. I mean, you just make it work. The innovation out of desperation or poor planning that occurs here is breathtaking sometimes. So yeah, that's perfect.
And just the like the difference in terms of like what the amount of detail and effort that gets put into a field protocol and then like the amount of like planning that goes
Yeah,
into like I guess maybe we shouldn't have bought six
yeah.
months worth of eggs at the beginning of the trip in a
Yeah.
place without refrigeration. Like we'll see how far they get.
Oh my God. Yeah, yeah, that sounds about right. So, well, that was great, man. I appreciate it. That was a particularly funny one for me because I've lived these types of stories, and I'm sure I will live more of them in the future. So that's great. So I really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. It was great having you on, and I'm sure my co-host would love to chat with you in the future as well. So somewhere down the road, we'll catch up again, hopefully, and share some more stories, and maybe we'll have you on again in the new year and talk about the some of the new books that are coming. So yeah, we really appreciate it. Yeah, it'll be
Yeah, that'd
awesome.
be
So
great.
again, thank you so much. Again, Habitats of the World is already out, and the next Habitats of North America is coming next year, and a few other books as well, as you said. So we'll share your profile on Instagram when we post, and we'll be sure to share the books when they come out as well. So thanks again, Phil. Really appreciate it, and we'll be in touch again in the future. Have a good day.
Yeah, good talking to you.
Well, that was awesome. Really happy having Phil on the show. I know that both Nick and Michela will be a little bit sad that they didn't get a chance to pick his brain as well. But I had a pleasure speaking to Phil, and just to start off with the story. I mean, I completely understand what it is like dealing with that type of thing in Peru and honestly any tropical country. For me, one of the reasons that I wanted to create this podcast, when I talked to Nick, I guess a year ago now about it, and then we talked to Michela, was these stories. Because, when I hear Phil describe this, I'm like, it's totally normal. Just another day in Peru, completely normal for things to be last minute and barely planned and just figure it out as you go. That is just life here. But if you've never been here, you're like, what the hell is going on here? Like, how is this okay? And it's actually from my perspective, it's quite, Phil spoke about seeing things new through the eyes of his tourists and people. And I see that sometimes in a good way with our volunteers and people I work with as well. But I also see the reactions of people when things are just crazy. Like you're like, oh, we're just going to jump in this truck, or oh well, that's going to come tomorrow. You don't have it today, or that's not going to come, or make this work. And you climb here, walk there. And like people who aren't used to this life, they come here and they're just like, what the hell? How is this? This is not possible. And especially, yeah, it's always entertaining for me to work with, especially with Germans. I love Germans. I love Germans People who know me know this. I work with so many, and I have great friends that are German. But Germans like planning, like consistency, they like precision. Man, that doesn't exist in the tropics, you know? And it's so fun to watch their reaction as they slowly just get to used to it. And be like, well, it is what it is. We'll figure it out. And that is the attitude you have to have. And it's all, in a way, it's a good life lesson. You know, there's a lot that we can learn from that attitude, you know, as Westerners, as people from those like structured, rushed countries. Of course, sometimes, you know, we can bring some experience with planning and maybe logistics and technology to help things maybe run smoother in some of these countries. But man, we can also learn from people in these countries as well, and not just Peru, but all over the tropics, who are more like, it's okay, you know, do you have a place to sleep? Do you have food? Are you healthy? Yeah. Well, then why are you stressed? And you know, there's something to be said for that. So I really loved that story. It was great. Really enjoyed it. And yeah, I mean, also some of the places Phil's gotten to be, and some places he'd still like to visit. Yeah, amazing life. And it's also really cool to see, you know, for those people listening who wonder, you know, what am I going to do with my career? Where am I going to go? You know, I mean, university, but yeah, where am I going to go? How am I going to transition? You know, what's the future? What's the career, etc. It just shows you, like, I didn't ask Phil. It's true, but I don't think Phil, when he was in his, you know, second year of university, was planning to do what he does today. You know, probably not. But life just took him there. And, you know, well, we won't go into my life, but my life's the same. And I'm sitting here talking to this computer, which eventually will be listened to by you as the viewers. And man, I never thought I'd be here 10, 20 years ago. So, you know, it shows you how unpredictable life is. And sometimes it can be tough, but sometimes that unpredictability can be beautiful and amazing. And yeah, it was really cool just to hear a bit about Phil's journey and where he's at now. And yeah, I can't wait to see where he goes in the future, and can't wait to see where I go and Nick and Michela go, and all of you as well. So yeah, on that overly inspirational note, we're going to wrap it up, and we'll see what happens. Speaking of uncertainty, we'll see what happens next week. But yeah, we have a few guests lined up, a few ideas, and yeah, I will probably see you along with probably Michela only. I don't think Nick's going to be available for a while. He's going to be playing with gorillas for a while. But I think probably Michela and myself will be back next week, and we will see you then. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.